the second week in a four-part series on Matthew Fox's book, Original Blessing, which talks about the four paths of experiencing God within a creation spirituality context. The whole concept of creation spirituality invites us to deconstruct the old Christian model of fall redemption theology, which focused on the sin of humanity and the need for humanity to be redeemed. And instead it calls us to construct a theology based on the goodness of God and the goodness of creation. Last week we talked about the Via Positiva. The Via Positiva is the path of affirmation and thanksgiving and ecstasy. Affirmation says that we continue to remind ourselves that creation is good and we are part of creation and that we are inherently good at the core of our beings. Thanksgiving says that we look in nature especially for the things of awe and wonder and mystery in this world that lead us to this deep, deep sense of gratitude and thanksgiving within. And then the concept of ecstasy and pleasure, and saying this wonderful creation is all around us and its awesomeness. It's our responsibility really to enjoy it, to take pleasure in it, and to find God in that pleasure, as opposed to sort of the old way of thinking, which was, well, if it feels good, it must be sinful. This way says that ecstasy is the experience of God. So we find ourselves in the Via Negativa this morning. And this is actually another Matthew Fox book called Creation Spirituality, where he sets out a commandment of each of the four paths. And the commandment for the Via Negativa, the thing you're supposed to do, is thou shalt dare the dark. Meister Eckhart says that the ground of the soul is dark. This implies that there is no moving from superficiality to depth without entering the dark. And every spiritual journey is about moving from the surface to the depths. Eckhart also says that God is super essential darkness. So there is no encountering the divinity merely in the light. The divine is to be met in the depths of darkness as well as in the light. Daring the dark means entering nothingness and letting it be nothingness while it works its mystery on us. Daring the dark also means allowing pain to be pain and learning from it.
The scripture reading this morning is from Psalms 139, verses 1 through 12. Yahweh, you search me, and you know me. You know if I am standing or sitting. You read my thoughts from far away. Whether I walk or lie down, you are watching. You are intimate with all of my ways. A word is not even on my tongue, Yahweh, before you know what it is. You hem me in before and behind, shielding me with your hand. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, a height my mind cannot reach. Where could I run from your spirit? Where could I flee from your presence? If I go up to heaven, you're there. If I make my bed in death, you're already there. I can fly away with wings made of dawn, or make my home on the far side of the sea. But even there, your hand will guide me, your mighty hand holding me fast. If I say, the darkness will hide me and the night will be my only light, even darkness won't be dark to you. The night will shine like the day. Darkness and light are the same to you.
Would you pray with me? Holy One, these are perhaps new ways of understanding, new ways of exploring. And so perhaps more difficult to get clear. Help me to be clear. Help me to channel your spirit and be with us as we seek deeper understanding of ourselves, a view of life and the universe. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of each of our hearts be filled with your wisdom and your insight. Amen. So the Via Positiva is a really great path. You know, it's all about those quote-unquote good things, the things of light, and pleasure, and fun, and, you know, it's our time of joys, all wrapped up into one. But what would happen if that were our only path? If we left it there? If we said, oh, you can only find God in all of the light and good things? What would happen then when we went through difficult times, or times of sorrow and suffering and struggle? You wouldn't be able to feel it, or maybe you wouldn't be able to cope. You'd feel alone. Perhaps you'd feel like God had deserted you. Maybe you'd feel like God was punishing you.
I have to fight to believe.
You have to fight to believe what?
Good. To fight to believe that there's good.
Fight to believe that there's good. Sure, when you're in the midst of those dark times. It might also lead us to simply want to deny that there's anything wrong. Oh no, things are fine. We have a hard time with that anyways. We don't like to dwell on the negative things or the struggles or the difficult times. And so maybe we might deny it, or we might hide it. Oh, everything's fine. That wonderful four-letter word, everything's fine. So we deny it, we hide it, maybe we even run from it. So if we only have the Via Positiva, it knocks out a good chunk of our life and says that God isn't in all that, and that just doesn't work. The psalm today that Robin read reminds us that there's nowhere that we can go where God is not. Nothing that we can experience or do, nowhere we can go where God is not. Even the darkness, the psalmist says. You're even there in the darkness, and the darkness isn't dark to you. So it's an affirmation, which I suppose is the first path. But it says that God is with us in everything, no matter what. Not just in those things of light and beauty and wonder and joy, but God is there in the midst of our pain and our struggle and our suffering. And I want to be very clear. I am not saying that God causes those things. I'm simply saying that God is with us in them. When we make mistakes and screw up, God's there. When we're grieving and we've lost somebody we care about, God's there. When we get divorced, or have an abortion, or give up a child for adoption, or do drugs, or end up in jail, God's there. When we're struggling with illness and pain and chronic illness, God's there. When, gosh, help me, what else? There's all kinds of stuff that God's got to be there in the midst of. When we're angry and we're fighting and we throw things and we drink until we don't remember anymore, God's there. It doesn't matter how we label things. Those are all human labels, whether they're good or bad or indifferent or otherwise. God's in the midst of all of them, no matter what. And so even the darkest days become paths to experience God. Even apparently what pain and suffering is going on in the kitchen right now is a path to God. So the Via Positiva is this wonderful, necessary part of enjoying the divine and connecting with God. But the Via Negativa is just as important because it's the place where we grow. So, many of you may remember the story about Karan Butler, but I'm going to share it again because it's just a great story about diving into the darkness. So Karan Butler, if you're not familiar, is an NBA star for many, many years. That was his second chance at life. He has shared often about his first chance at life and did an Oprah interview a number of years ago where he talked about growing up on the streets in Racine, in the gangs, and watching people being beaten and murdered, seeing people hurt, and all kinds of things that really nobody should ever have to witness. Saw people arrested, but he was a kid. He went, well, I'm indestructible, and none of this will ever happen to me. And yet he was arrested 15 times. The last time he was arrested at school for carrying a handgun and selling cocaine. That earned him a trip to juvenile detention, essentially prison, at the age of 15. It was there that he discovered his passion for basketball on the yard basketball court, working out his anger and his frustration with that basketball. But it wasn't until he spent 2 weeks in solitary confinement that he really came to grips with what had happened in his life. And solitary confinement was not fun. It was 2 weeks in a 7 by 12 foot cell where it was dark 23 hours a day and he got food passed into him through a slot in the door. He said it was there that he really did a deep self-examination and came to grips with what had happened to his life. Oprah kind of called it a little come to Jesus meeting. But it was there that he decided he was going to turn things around. He wrote his mother long letters apologizing for what he'd done and telling her that she was never going to have to worry about him again. So when he got out, he had birthed a new person in that solitary confinement. When he got out of prison, he got his high school diploma, not here. He went to college, and he eventually realized his dream of being an NBA starting forward. This fall, he's going to be a TV analyst with NBC Sports for the Washington basketball team. But he basically said that he's now able to be thankful for the darkness, for that time that he went through, because it helped him grow. It helped him go from being this sort of egotistical, I know everything, big-headed kind of teenager to having some humility and to turning his life around. And now many of you probably know that he not only does all his basketball stuff, but he spends a lot of time talking to young people about having a second chance, about having hope. But it took that time in the darkness for him to recognize that he was more than the darkness. You know, every spiritual path that's out there that I respect tells you that you have to enter into the darkness. You have to do what Matthew Fox says is the commandment for this path, which is you have to dare the dark. You have to go into it, or you live on the superficiality of life, and you don't learn, and you don't grow. The spiritual path is going in, it's going deeper, it's confronting the things in the darkness that we don't want to confront. It's doing what Karan Butler did, which was looking yourself in the face and saying, this is what I like, this is what I don't like, this is who I want to be, this is my true self underneath all this crap that I've been living with or layered my life with or dealing with. And that true self is what's connected to the divine. That's what lies at the heart of the Via Negativa. We dare the dark to find ourselves and to find God. So the silence is an important piece of this path. Going into that darkness for Karan Butler is part of it, but the silence is the other piece. And it's not just silence where we don't hear anything. It's a silence that's like a soul-deep silence where all of our preconceived notions and our labels and the things we thought we knew, the stories we told ourselves or the stories other people told us are all gone. It's a silence where there's nothing auditory or visual or imagined or anything that's creeping up from inside. We gotta let go of all of our expectations and all of that preconceived stuff and clear the slate and start fresh. And perhaps in that silence where we have nothing else telling us what we're supposed to think or what we're supposed to do or what we're supposed to believe, in that silence we find self and we find our path. In that silence, perhaps we're able to let go of that which has held us captive, like Karan Butler was able to do. Sometimes, though, we can't. There are things that we just can't easily let go of. Sometimes we have to learn to let be. So there's a difference. If this crumpled up piece of paper is all of the things you struggle with and suffer with, the difficulties in your life, that these things that we continually work at. Boy, put a piece of crumpled up paper in your hand and you just sit there and you do this. You clench it and you unclench it and you work it and you struggle with it and you hang on to it in this tight little fist. And this is what we do with our stuff. All of those things of the darkness that we struggle with. We do this with. And we hang on to them. And, people, you hear that, I just let it go. Yeah, I just let it go. And sometimes, perhaps if you've worked through the darkness, maybe you can let it go. But sometimes there are things you can't just toss this, it comes blowing back in your face, right? There are relationships you have to deal with. There are work conflicts you have to deal with. There are chronic illnesses you have to deal with. Sometimes the letting go isn't easy. So there's an alternative. The alternative is to metaphorically flip the hand up and open it and unclench it. And to make space around that which you're struggling with. So that you can get some perspective on it. Take a step back. Be a little more objective. Analyze it. See what it is for what it is. And perhaps in that perspective, gain a healthier way of dealing or a healthier insight on it. This is letting be when you can't let go. What is it in your life right now that perhaps you need to let be if you can't let it go? Because in doing this, we're not clenching so much anymore. We're not resisting so much anymore. We're not fretting so much anymore. We're just allowing ourselves to sit with it. And perhaps eventually, some of those things will be able to move to a place of letting go. One more story. There was once a queen who was often a very angry queen. fall season, she found herself actually very melancholy, very despondent. She couldn't eat, she couldn't sleep. She found herself with tears streaming down her face, which made her very angry. And so she would just erupt at people, which made them all a little afraid to be around her. And she wanted to know what the problem with her was. And so every day she called one of her advisors, one of her sage circle of advisors. And each day one of them failed. The physician failed, and the psychic failed, and the stargazer failed, and the philosopher failed, and they all failed. Because they couldn't tell her what it was that was ailing her. They couldn't seem to lift this royal darkness that had fallen upon her. And they were all happy to have left her presence with simply their careers shortened and nothing else. Well, the queen cried out, she said, "Isn't there anyone who can tell me why I suffer so much?" And of course, nobody stepped forward because they didn't want to incur her wrath. And then one day, Dean, there was the gardener. And the gardener had such compassion for the queen because the queen was suffering so much. And the gardener went before the queen and said, "Come into the garden, Your Majesty. Step out of your self-imposed prison and come back out into the world." Well, the queen was ready to try just about anything. So she went out into the garden. She hadn't been out in weeks. And the beauty and the vibrancy of summer was gone. But you know, even in fall, there's a beauty and a regalness. And she saw that in the crimsons and the golds in the garden and the blue sky and the crisp, cool air. And the gardener said to her, "Your Majesty, it's not your body or your mind that ails you. It's your soul that needs healing. Because as strong and powerful as you are, Your Majesty, you are still not divine. And you still struggle with the same human struggles that the rest of us do, which is the ebb and flow of our emotions in the emotional seasons of life. As we deal with the seasons of joy and the seasons of sorrow, it's just like the natural world that has its own seasons of life and death and rebirth. So what you need to know, Your Majesty, that even while our days are growing shorter and our nights are growing longer, the true light that illumines everything never goes out. And it never dies. And it's the same for your soul. The true light that illumines your soul is with you always. And just as night turns into day, so this darkness will again turn into beautiful days of light and warmth and brilliancy, and you will be contented once again. But for now, embrace the ebb. This is the time to harvest what's in our hearts and to prepare for the closing of the year. But embrace the ebb. And the queen looked at the gardener and thought about this a little bit and then said, "How did you get to be so smart? Where does this wisdom come from that you know all of this?" And the gardener led the queen over to a sundial on the side of the path. The sundial said, "This too shall pass." Dare the dark. Let go, let be, embrace the ebb. Don't be afraid of the darkness. Because the true light is even within all of that to help us to learn and to grow and to become who we are. And all of that will carry us to the next path, next week, the Via Creativa.